Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I'm not used to the idea that the Chargers can win games late on Monday Night Football.
They held on to a lead. They managed the clock really well. They performed some positive shenanigans on special teams.
I'm very confused as to what this means for the rest of football for the rest of my life, honestly. I don't understand this at all. This is just this isn't okay. How are they allowed to get away with this?
I'm sure if we looked up Witch Talk or some astrology accounts, they would tell us that there is some planet or other in retrograde. That's probably true. It feels like it's always true, so that might be it. Which, even though it's always true, tells us that it's a temporary condition. I don't know much about how any of that works.
Despite being an expert in hexing the moon, unfortunately, there are limits.
You know how people get PhDs in very narrow fields, like the use of specifically gamma radiation to treat only this type of cancer, but only using this machine and only in this stage of development. It's like that. It's like you hyper focus and you develop a distinct specialty and advance human knowledge by one iota in that area, and you just kind of hope that everyone else is keeping up. Otherwise, humanity has a lot of knowledge about just the one thing.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I obviously am very familiar with that, seeing as how I've done IT work for professors with doctorates for years, and they know so much about their topic. Or this has been my experience, anyways. They know so much about their topic because they're specialists, and they cannot turn on a printer. Just kind of the way it works.
And I would know because I don't have a degree.
So as a result, you know what? We're just going to go right into this. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are doing better right now than you probably were on Sunday watching that attempt at a Vikings game. We will be talking more about that Browns game in just a moment, along with a discussion on a little bit of news that's happened since the game involving Darissa, Barr, and Dantzler, and of course the mailbag. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. By the time that you hear this, the Norse Code store up on Threadless will have a new shirt, a new design option for you. You have your opportunity to get the regular Norse Code shirt designed by Drop Play Dave, or the new Christmas edition of the Norse Code shirt, which is more featuring Arif than anything else. And I hope you guys enjoy this. This is a long time coming, and it's finally time to get this out into the public, out into the ether.
I feel like, okay, so obviously it's the drawing was by Draw Play Dave, right? So of the Christmas shirt, but I feel like we should also credit Eric Thompson a little bit too, right? Because he did the Photoshop that the drawing is based on, if I remember correctly.
Yep, he did.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
So shout out to Eric. He probably knows immediately what this is. Eric, don't spoil it. I would love for people to find out what the Christmas sweater. I'm sure a lot of people kind of already figured it out, but I like the idea that some people are going to be surprised by how dumb it is.
Exactly. There's plenty of options here, including Christmas socks. So if you're interested in such a thing,
Jesus, such a thing, I need you to send me the whole thing, the sweater, the socks, a mask. I need everything, James.
This is what your Patreon dollars are building towards. Arif is just building a brand, much like the Big Baller brand, where his entire outfit, including masks, is going to be involving things for himself. So this is, if you want this to happen, please, patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go over to threadless.com and check this out. NorseCode.threadless.com is where the store is. So check it out. This is quite the design. And
just think about my brother opening up a gift, and it's that design on a mug. And then inside the mug, he pulls out socks. What's on the socks? Oh my God. It's the design again.
It's his little brother's face all over his socks now.
Yeah.
I'm hearing his cackle laughter right now in my head. And
So my brother has an even more distinctive laugh than I do, and it's even louder than mine, which I know a lot of people won't believe, but James can attest to this.
This is absolutely 100% the case. You can hear it miles away.
Yeah, he back in high school, he was up for like a number of. So my brother was like this kind of high achiever. He was like captain of the debate team, but like good at it. But in North Dakota and in a different debate.
Still went to nationals, and
went
I can
to
attest
nationals,
to that.
right? Yeah. Got accepted into an Ivy League school. Ran like a successful free speech campaign against the principal of very high performance, high visibility person in high school. And so he won a bunch of end of year awards, or he was up for the running for a bunch of end of year awards, like most likely to succeed, most likely to be president, all those things. And he won like a couple of them, right? But the rules for the yearbook committee at the time is that you could only win one, which is a good rule. And so they decided that he would win the one that was most appropriate to him, which was most distinctive laugh. He was like one of two people, maybe three in that graduating class to like go to an Ivy League college. And they were like, yeah, but it's the laugh. It's the laugh.
I think I actually still have that yearbook somewhere. He looks overjoyed to be winning the most distinctive laugh, not most likely to succeed or anything like that.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, that's he's definitely thinking about that most distinctive laugh thing when he's on ABC News on a Sunday morning for the talk show things. Yeah. Well, again, welcome to Norse Code. Let's talk about Patreon real quick. We've got bonus episodes up on patreon.com/Norse Code. You can donate there for $3.50 per month. You get access to all the bonus episodes, which is awesome. There's like 38 of them, so go check that out, including the latest one is the interview with Drawplay Dave. Next week, there will be another bonus episode out for you guys, some pre-show stuff, so check that out. Or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code as well and donate to the show there. That's more of a one-time donation. Depending on the size of the donation, you also do get access to things like the bonus episodes for the year. So check that out. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. I know that the team is not doing as well as we would like, but we still really appreciate all the listens, all the shares on social media, all the following on social media. So again, thank you so much. And of course, the merch is live over at norsecode.threadless.com, and you can get yourself all of your Christmas sock needs over at norsecode.threadless.com. They actually just had a special. I think they're going to have another one here shortly for this. So check it out. People who are on the Patreon are going to get a code as well emailed to them if they want to buy something from the Norse Code shop here for the rest of the year. Just knocks off a couple of bucks. So again, there are benefits to being a member of the Patreon. So let's get.
I just went over to the site to look at I am trying not to just die laughing. This is absolutely incredible.
I pulled up one of the shirts and it has a vintage wash on it. And it's like,
yeah, man, why not? Sure. Doesn't make any sense.
Nope. This is perfect. And I feel like you know exactly what to do for Christmas for all of your relatives, honestly. I'm sure your mom would be very confused by the shirt and generally okay with it.
Yeah. Oh my God, the hoodie. Jesus. There's a toddler pullover hoodie. Oh my God. It's so cute.
It might almost fit. All right, let's get into the game. The Vikings lost this one. It was not a pretty game. It had moments where it looked like the Vikings were going to be able to pull it off, mainly the first drive. Before we start, we did something similar a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like it's time to bring it back. Where Arif proceeds to debate the only person who can be potentially on his level as far as debating is concerned. Arif debates Arif. So we're going to go through the three people who are most responsible for this loss, and we're going to start with the refs. Arif, why was it the refs' fault that the Vikings lost this game?
I mean, whenever you take a look at a one-score game like this, it's obviously going to be, it's a game of inches, and so kind of these small advantages build up over time. And so if you have unfair officiating, that's obviously going to be one of the most important aspects of determining, who should have won the game based off of things like better play and whatnot. And you just take a look at, the things that the Vikings are known for, right? They're known for third downs. They're known for red zone. It's kind of how they build their defense. And you really can't execute on that kind of stuff if you keep on giving the other team free downs, if they get automatic first downs, if they get automatic, another set of downs in the red zone. It absolutely robs certain teams more than it does other teams when you have certain specialties like that. And it's just absolutely, it's a death knell to the way that teams run football, because one of the great things we love about football, of course, is about the way different teams are constructed. And so you take a look at stuff like the phantom holding called against Eric Hendricks. I mean, it's such a ticky-tacky call that it's just remarkable that they decided to do that against one of the best coverage defenders in the league. It didn't even impede that player's movement. It gives them 4 new downs. They end up running 8 plays after getting first and goal. And of course, they run a touchdown. It's a 7-score game. That changes everything, including the play calling from the rest of the game going forward. But then you take a look at another instance of a much bigger call at a much more important moment in the game, the very last play. And there's no defensive pass interference called on Adam Thielen. There's no defensive pass interference called on KJ Osborne. And I know that people are like, well, hey, you have to call it on catchable throws. But I mean, like, if refs are going to call ticky-tack throws in the end zone on critical downs, they should do it at the end of the game. And it's not as if it's one of those instances where it's a Hail Mary and everyone is kind of just, moving around and stuff like that. It's absolutely a normal play that just happens to be at the end of the game. And Adam Thielen is impeded from being able to run his route by an interfering defender, one where Adam Thielen would have been able to catch that ball and contest for that catch, had he not been impeded, had he been able to actually track the ball like a receiver would have been able to. Speaking of Adam Thielen, I mean, again, this is not a call that I personally would make in a game. I think that, Greedy Williams, that interception, fair play to Greedy Williams, really good from him. But, if you're going to call the kinds of stuff like you do on Eric Hendricks, you absolutely have to call the defensive pass interference on Greedy Williams for the way that he impeded the route of Adam Thielen on that play. And we're talking about, these big plays that have such a big impact on the game when smaller plays would have been able to move the game in a 1-score game. And we're talking about removing like a 40-yard defensive pass interference, a game-winning touchdown throw, or a game-tying touchdown throw. Like all of these things that add up. And we're not even talking about, the holding call on Tyler Conklin. Like, I understand everyone's like kind of upset with Zimmer for having, Tyler Conklin block, one-on-one against Myles Garrett. But, that's kind of just the way that Max Protect works. And it was a completed pass for 37 yards. Myles Garrett has to get around Tyler Conklin, and Conklin doesn't hold. He blocks. And the refs decide to call that for no reason. In the meantime, they're supposed to be holding on every play, but why aren't they calling holding more often on the Browns then? If there's holding on every play, why am I not hearing about it more often when the Browns offensive line holds? Ridiculous. I mean, they average, like 4.8 yards a carry. And I wonder why. I wonder how they did it against people who weigh 370 pounds apiece. Incredible that the Browns were able to get away with what they did and run the clock, have that time of possession advantage, all because the refs refused to call one of the most obvious calls in all of football, holding.
All right, Arif. So why was this Kirk Cousins' fault on Sunday?
Absolutely ridiculous that you would blame the refs. I mean, holding on every play, that's reaching. You know that somebody's reaching when they decide that they should just call holding on the offensive line more often. But back to that DPI on Adam Thielen, it's pretty obvious. I mean, Adam Thielen wasn't even complaining about a flag after the play. And when the receiver is not complaining, Adam Thielen loves talking to refs. When the receiver is not talking to the ref about a DPI, that's not on the cards. Why don't you just throw it to the receiver? You could avoid this whole thing. I mean, they always say you got to make the game so out of the ref's hands so that you win without one or two of these calls. I mean, you take a look at the Eric Hendricks DPI. He's holding a jersey. We see the jersey move. It doesn't matter, whether or not you can judge intent or whether or not we know whether or not the receiver's impeded. You have to call it like you see it. And the first thing we want from a ref is objectivity. We want them to be able to call it the same way every time. And so you take a look at these letter of the law calls, that's a good thing. And Kirk Cousins can't overcome that. I mean, he misses KJ Osborne wide open and takes a sack from Takkarist McKinley instead. That would have changed the game. Like, why are we talking about a holding call on Tyler Conklin, who has to match up against Myles Garrett of all people? I mean, I can't believe you would just wash that over and not decide to make up for it with another deep shot to what seems to be your best receiver right now, right? And KJ Osborne, who's got a clean shot for a touchdown. That changes the game. And, that interception, I mean, yeah, Greedy Williams had great position for an underthrown ball. He was underneath Adam Thielen. Throw a touchdown, right? I mean, Kirk Cousins was so scared to throw the kill shot. I'm beginning to think he has to be trained to throw deep shots. I mean, the Vikings haven't been throwing deep this year because of the instant pressure they might be getting from these other defenses. He's throwing it short, and now he's already hardwired to throw it short. He can't throw these deep shots anymore. And that's why the Vikings weren't able to threaten deep, and that's why Dalvin Cook didn't get any room to run, because the Browns were so comfortable putting another safety in the box because Cousins was afraid to throw it deep. I mean, I can't believe that we're talking about a holding call here. I mean, the Browns ended up with more penalty yards than the Vikings. Ridiculous to think that it's on the refs, especially, I mean, we knew that this was coming. The Browns are above 500. We know that Cousins can't beat above 500 teams. And then you take a look at the very end of the game, he shouldn't even have had to need that touchdown throw to Adam Thielen at the very end of the game, because he should have been able to throw a touchdown the play prior, but instead it was he takes 5 seconds off the clock to get 6 yards when there's 8 seconds left. He could have run 2 more plays. Instead, he decides, I got to be closer. 30 yards, that's tough. I mean, what am I telling you about throwing deep, right? He can't throw deep. He knows he can't throw 30 yards this year for whatever reason. So he decides, I'm going to need 6 more yards. The end zone's a little bit too far away from me. That's a situation where we want to be a little bit more. It's the end of the game, Kirk. Throw touchdown.
All right, so finally, why was this Mike Zimmer's fault?
I mean, we're talking about clock management. Zimmer, Cousins learned it from watching you. I mean, who better to train an unaware quarterback at the end of games than somebody who has some of the worst clock management in the NFL? Did Mike Zimmer throw the ball to Tyler Conklin? No, but he might as well have told him to. And the first thing he did after the game was defend Cousins' throw to Conklin at the very end of the game. The head coach, that culture filters down throughout the rest of the team. That kind of clock management is something that's just kind of endemic to the Vikings, and having to give away the ball in what should have been the final 2-minute drive only to find a way to get it back and failing then again. I mean, that's just a classic Zimmer defense. And then you take a look at where Zimmer had insisted on getting all of his resources on the defense, and it's on run defense. I mean, we've got, 2 tackles that weigh over 330 pounds and they can't stop the run. Yeah, of course, that's holding, right? It's not anything else. It's not that, Dalvin Tomlinson can't figure out where he needs to go on his block when he's blocking, a man on the front side of a play. It's not because, that they've got, Dalvin Tomlinson there on passing downs and Sheldon Richardson on there on running downs. And it's not because they've got Armin Watts instead of Michael Pierce on 3rd and 1. No, it's entirely because of holding. Yeah, sure. I mean, the Vikings were playing the wrong defensive tackles at the wrong moments in every moment in the game. And we know that the Browns are a running team. They've got 2 backs that are fantasy viable. I mean, they're the only team in the league that's like that. That's ridiculous. And on top of that, I mean, even when the defensive line is playing well, nobody else is able to tackle. I mean, this is a guy that prides himself on being able to teach people to tackle. And in fact, he's unteaching them. I mean, Harrison Smith is missing tackles. How often does that happen? Eric Kendricks is missing tackles. He's missed more tackles this year than he did all of last season. Incredible. I mean, this is entirely about a coach who finally has a full offseason to prepare with the quarterback that he wants, with an offensive coordinator that he seems to respect a lot, and he forgets to teach his team how to tackle. Ridiculous. And, I mean, again, it's a game of inches, right? I mean, one big play taken away from the Browns, and you've got everything. So why are you getting Mr. Big Play, Bashad Breeland, out there just generally playing, and he allows the Browns to get into the red zone and be able and figure out a way to score? I mean, that's entirely on Zimmer. And then, of course, I mean, just the offensive line. I mean, just like generally, right? Like, who does a worse job of finding offensive line coaches than Mike Zimmer? They don't have a way to identify offensive line talent. That's not even on the scouting staff, because offensive line scouting is typically controlled in a large part by the offensive line coaching staff and who hires them. It's Zimmer. I mean, the buck stops there. You've got a bad offensive line. You've got a bad head coach.
Bonus round. What do you think is the more accurate statement? The Vikings are the best of the worst teams in the league, or the worst of the best teams in the league?
Oh, absolutely. The best of the worst teams in the league, right? Because you can't be one of the best teams in the league unless you've got a resume. If you're 1-3, right? Like if the Chiefs are 1-3, you're putting them top 10 in the power rankings. But the Vikings, they haven't proven anything. They're definitely in the worst conversation, but they also have a positive point differential. I mean, that's based off of one game, but their losses have been nothing, right? And their win has been by quite a bit. And you learn a lot more about teams by their record in multiple score games than you do about their record in close games. Like going forward, close game record doesn't replicate. Not close game record does replicate. And so the Vikings are a team that has demonstrated quality from play to play to play, but they don't have the wins yet. So right now you consider them a team that's not good, but they've got the kind of quality that will allow, a turnaround. I mean, we've seen this before, not just with like the Houston Texans, but we've seen this with some other losing teams. I think there was like a Carolina Panthers run where they finished the season 7-1, and it's because they lost all their close games and then they won all their close games after that. So I think when you don't have the kind of resume to say that, you're a playoff team, you can't really call yourself, a good team until you win a couple. So I think right now we'd say they're the best of the worst teams. I don't know how much that's worth.
I think at some point we need to do like a Patreon exclusive where people just write in things that you need to find some way of defending, like within reason. Like
within reason. Yeah, I'm not defending some of history's worst atrocities.
Well, you spend enough time talking about the Vikings offensive line to
kind of setting you up for that.
Yeah. I was right there after we briefly mentioned Matt Khalil in the pre-show stuff. So yeah, that's a thing. But all right, so let's look at the game itself. This was an infuriating loss, and people should. I was like actually upset at the end of the game. I was sitting here going like, how can you reward this type of quarterback play with a win? Like QB wins shouldn't necessarily be a stat, but it was still infuriating to think that you could have a quarterback play this poorly and their team could still get a win over your helpless Vikings. Like it didn't make any sense. This was a team, or this was a quarterback rather. Let's just focus on Baker Mayfield for a moment, who, in defiance of God's will, was finding ways to actually connect to receivers, despite the fact that he was underthrowing, he was overthrowing, he was throwing at the backs of jerseys, and nothing. He gets the win. Like it was so annoying how often that the Browns tried to give this win away. This was the equivalent of, oh, do you want this spot? No, you can take this spot. You can park here. No, I think you should park. It was Sunday afternoon at Target.
Yeah, it was extremely Minnesotan. I guess like sort of a silver lining, like Browns fans walked out of that game also mad at Baker Mayfield. So it's not as if like anybody came out of that feeling like, yeah, this was deserved.
Eric Thompson had the best tweet of the game when he had said, and I'm quoting here, "Is Baker Mayfield a better actor than quarterback?" And this was before the fourth quarter.
I think he is, and I actually think that he's a much better quarterback than what we saw. I mean, he would have to be, right? A much better quarterback than what we saw in this game. But man, he's like really good in those commercials. Like he's killing it in those commercials. I love it. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of like this like ghostly shadow of the Josh Freeman 2013 Monday Night Football game, where both teams were essentially playing to lose, right? And the other team, it was just whoever had the ball last would end up losing. Like Mayfield's throws directly into Dancer's helmet, directly over Odell Beckham, just awful shit. Like there was like one throw where I thought it was wide receiver miscommunication, and I was able to talk to Zach Kiefer, who covers the Browns for The Athletic, and that turns out to be the case. That was on the weird deep shot to Odell Beckham that went inside and Beckham went outside. That was just miscommunication. But everything else was just like Mayfield was just off. I mean, missing Demetric Felton on third down, like nuts. Like it's just wide open, and he decides to run it and see if he can kind of out agility Danielle Hunter. Like just, yeah, absolutely awful game. I'm going to just get out ahead of this mailbag question. I think we got it 2 or 3 times, and I think one's actually in our mailbag. I'm just going to get out and answer it now. This was not a case of the Vikings defense, pass defense, playing particularly spectacularly. It was absolutely a case of Baker Mayfield playing poorly, because, I mean, you take a look at like the yards per snap allowed, and Cameron Dantzler comes out like way ahead. Like, wow, great game. Then you take a look at how often he was burned by Odell. And I'm not saying that Bashaud Breeland is a better option right now than Cameron Dantzler. I'm very open to this conversation, but I don't think Cameron Dantzler's play demonstrated any of that, because he got burned a couple of times and Baker just didn't take advantage of it. And you can't use that performance to say, well, here's evidence that, I mean, Baker nailed it right at his helmet, and Dantzler's never, like, he just never seems to know when to turn around, and you just feel like that's a disaster waiting to happen on a more accurate throw, which I just feel like that's on the schedule. I mean, we just saw Justin Herbert play lights out. You know, you've got Lamar Jackson, who's actually been playing really well, throwing a really accurate ball, you know, this year and for a decent chunk of last year, post-COVID. Just like, there's all, I mean, and not to mention, like, in division, you've got Aaron Rodgers. We don't even know which Justin Fields we'll get, but, you know, the last edition of Justin Fields was pretty accurate. When you've got these accurate throws for guys willing to throw the deep ball, I don't know that Cameron Dantzler is going to hold up. So, very clearly an instance where, and, you know, the Vikings front got a little bit of pressure against a fairly decent Browns offensive line that, you know, in retrospect, I was hyping up a little bit more than needed to be. But that was primarily just like a lot of back end issues. And yeah, Baker Mayfield played really poorly.
I just didn't understand it. It bothered me so much. What was almost worse was watching their run game just destroy the Vikings defense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The thing is, it was mostly explosives, right? So here's one thing that felt frustrating afterwards. And if I hadn't like observed this and even tweeted it out and not anchored it in my head, I might not have come to this conclusion and thought about it more deeply. But Zimmer ends up saying something like, you know, you can have all the stats or whatever that you want. And he repeats this the next day too. You can have all the stats or whatever you want. I thought we played the run good, or something like that, you know? And I'll just get out ahead of this mailbag question too. You know, he says that they thought they played the run well. And for him, this primarily means, you know, are the linebackers reading the keys correctly? Are the defensive linemen playing with appropriate run-specific technique? Are they attacking the correct gap? Are they on the right shoulder? Are they doing kind of the right things to attack the run? Are they getting to where they need to be? Are we tackling well? And, you know, maybe they aren't necessarily tackling well, although I think it's probably better tackling than some of the other games that we've seen from the back seven. But, you know, are they getting to where they need to be on most of these? Are they executing the assignment that we give them from a film perspective? And on most downs, most of the time they are. And so when you grade it like plus minus or whatever, you would say that explosive is a minus, and you'd say that these other two plays where they were able to stop the run in the backfield, that's a plus, right? And so you end up positive in the run, even though you end up, you know, allowing like 6 yards a carry because of the explosive run. And so I tried to figure out if that was the case. Like, are the Vikings, week 4 Vikings gave up a lot of yards per carry. They gave up a lot of expected points in the run. But down to down, which is more sustainable, it's more predictive going forward, were they good in the run game? And it actually turns out, so context, Cleveland is third best in rush success rate heading into the game. The Vikings had the third best defense in rushing success rate. It just turns out that if you give up a run on 3rd and 20, and then there's like a couple, like there's a 9-yard run here and a 13-yard run there. Like, that's not the only one, right? But that one's emblematic of the thing. We're not talking about, you know, the tackles for losses here, or the 1-yard gain here or there. So, down to down, they were good, but then you just can't give up an explosive like that, especially one as deflating as 3rd and 20. But also, like, you can't, on 2nd and 7, you can't have them convert a first down on the ground. That's ridiculous. So, there are moments where it just felt like because they stacked up, you know, these highlight runs, it just feels like the run defense wasn't good. And effectively it wasn't, right? Because the net result was that because of the running game, the Vikings defense contributed to the loss. That's the net result. But based off of the stuff that helps us decide whether or not this is an issue going forward, I guess they were good because they held the third best rush success offense to the sixth worst rush success performance. So cool, I guess.
Is this one of those like being technically correct is the best kind of correct sort of things?
I mean, it might be the other way around, right? Because the Browns got to win, so they were technically correct, right? Like, so it might be the Vikings are spiritually correct, and that sucks.
Spiritually correct. Wow. You know, when he had said this in the presser, my only thought was going back to the movie Spinal Tap. And there's a scene where they're in the limo and the manager has to tell them that the gig is canceled. But the way he says it is, oh, by the way, the gig for tomorrow night's canceled, but don't worry, Boston's not a big college town. And the band all just buys it and everything. And meanwhile, anybody who knows anything about like, oh God, that's hilarious. So it felt a bit like that. It's like, oh yeah, I thought we did great against the run. It's like, what are you talking?
Wait, it was very, and he almost basically said, I thought we were good against the run, except on the plays where we weren't. It was essentially what he said. And like, that's true, but that's always true. And in a meaningful-ish way, that's kind of true. But like, you know, who cares, right? Like,
Avril sounds like Avril on all of her tracks, except for the ones that Melissa sings on. Like, fine.
Right, yeah. So going forward, I am not that concerned about the run game. Effectively, in this game, the Vikings did not have a good run defense, even though you can construct an argument as to why, you know, you should feel better about it, which I guess I did. But like going forward, not a concern based off of what happened in this game. But they lost the game because of their run defense. I mean, they lost the game for a lot of reasons, one-score game. But like one of the reasons they lost was their running defense.
So why couldn't the Vikings run the ball at all?
The offensive line is bad. That like plays a pretty big role, I think. So that's huge. But also, it definitely feels like the Dalvin Cook that we saw for the first two games is not the Dalvin Cook we're like getting right now. And I think there's this like lingering lack of explosiveness from the ankle, and you can't always tell, right? Because his fluidity, his like movement capability, from like, you know, being able to identify kind of where he needs to be and his ability to kind of move from one move to the next, find new lanes and stuff like that. That's all still there, but it's kind of the explosive one-step acceleration that we're used to seeing, his home run capability. That doesn't seem to be there. It just feels like he's a slower back. So I'm going to put that out there as just kind of an observation. You know, we asked after the game, like, hey, is Dalvin Cook kind of still dealing with this ankle thing? And, you know, he said no, that the Dalvin Cook is running about as well as he always does. And I don't know, but like Alexander Mattison looks faster than Alexander Mattison ever has. And that's good. I mean, he looks quite fast this year, but he should never look faster than Dalvin Cook. And that's what I felt watching the game. So that plays a role, is that even when Cook has some of these, and this kind of harkens back to the conversation we had last week, right? Which is, you know, is there a situation where you'd rather have Mattison than Dalvin Cook? And, you know, one of the arguments I made was that one of the best things a running back can do is build explosives for you, is to turn a 15-yard gain to a 40-yarder. If that's not what he is right now, and he has much better vision than Mattison, he's worse at actually blocking the guy in pass protection, but he's better at identifying who he needs to block. Mattison had at least two such errors in this Browns game, which is more useful because at least you're a speed bump as opposed to an escort, I guess. But yeah, so that conversation, I think, is been kind of cracked open a little bit more. Interestingly, Dalvin Cook had more yards before contact than Alexander Mattison in this game, but I think he ended up with worse rushing production. Either way, the offensive line didn't know how to deal with these defenders that kind of cap either side of the wide zone, and so they prevent you from getting to the edge and just cutting it forward normally on a wide zone. And then your typical answer to seeing those holes blocked up is to do the backside cutoff. But the Browns were very aggressive about attacking that backside cutoff, and the Vikings couldn't get those blocks in, which is something that Zimmer actually kind of identified in the presser after the game, is that, you know, the Vikings couldn't win those backside blocks, which is really important to the way that you run zone. So that wasn't there. So that was a big part of the reason the running game wasn't there. It's primarily the offensive line, but I want to add on top of that Cook couldn't really make much of what he was given anyway, because it didn't seem like he's physically, all what he normally is.
So why couldn't the Vikings effectively pass the ball?
Cousins had a pressure rate on all dropbacks of 55%. I think PFF, if you go into PFF, it's 53.5%. But if you include plays that have penalties, it's 55%. And so, whatever it is, it's up there. So I just submitted a piece, or actually I'm about to submit a piece right after the podcast is over, but I finished writing a piece, about the Vikings offensive line performance in this game. And it's staggering how bad it is. I'll share a couple of the tidbits, but a 55% pressure rate allowed is the third most, since I want to say 2018, that the Vikings have allowed. And I think they've only allowed 3 or 4 games. Yeah, I think 4 games above 50% in terms of pressure rate. And it's the Vikings offensive line, right? For you to be historically bad against yourself, in that way, that's a lot. Cousins has never won a game with a higher than 45% pressure rate, which is not, enormously out of character for Cousins, nor is it incredibly out of line with the rest of the NFL, though it is worse. One thing I found out when writing the piece is that teams that give up a 50% pressure rate or higher, or 53% pressure rate or higher, are win 25 or something, maybe 29% of their games. So it's tough to win if you give up a lot of pressure. Which that's not always on the offensive line. It could be because the quarterback's holding onto the ball. It could be because the play caller is calling 7-step drops. It could be, any number of reasons, right? It's not always on the offensive line, but that's one thing to take into account, is that you can't really win games if you're consistently giving up a higher than 50% pressure rate. The reason that coverage matters more than pass rushing is because, while it is more unstable to find coverage, the ability to cover contributes to pressure rate. So if you can cover receivers down the field, quarterback holds onto the ball longer, that creates pressure. So that's part of the reason that debate happens, despite this fact. The moment when these two percentages, which aren't really the same unit, so you shouldn't, but I'm doing it anyway, kind of cross, is at 40%. So teams that give up a pressure rate of 40% win about 40% of their games. That's kind of like when 40 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Fahrenheit meet, or something like that. It's kind of like that, except those measure the same thing in different ways, and this measures two completely different things that are sort of related. So you give up a pressure rate above 40%, and you're really fighting uphill. So that is a big part of why the passing game wasn't there. Some of that, so the Vikings have been very quick to get rid of the ball. I discussed that in detail in the piece. They were slightly slower for this season, relative to this season, to get rid of the ball. But it wasn't all quick pressures. There were moments where Cousins held onto the ball. There were moments where you end up with a running back doing the wrong thing. There are moments where all the receivers are covered, right? And the pressure is on the receivers for not being able to get open. Despite the fact that I think everyone's really happy with the receiving unit, there's still moments, like on 4th and 6, where nobody's open, right? There's moments where Cousins has a wide open receiver and he doesn't throw it to him, or he just doesn't trust his eyes or whatever, and he just kind of hitches, and that brings pressure. There are moments where Cousins doesn't manage or move up in the pocket. All of those contribute to this problem where Cousins isn't comfortable getting rid of the ball to who he wants to throw the ball to. So a lot of things at play. It would have been nice to see a better performance from the receivers. Justin Jefferson played really well. I thought Osborne played pretty well. Adam Thielen, we just didn't really get to see a lot of, and maybe it's because he wasn't really getting open as much as he should have been against that secondary. So all of these play a role. I think Cousins is certainly not blameless. I thought he played fairly poorly, despite grading on a curve because of the pressure. But I think the primary issue here is the amount of pressure that they saw, and I think the primary problem there in that case is the offensive line, and how I kind of parse that out is detailed in the piece.
So why isn't, I realize this is turning into a James asks mailbag question sort of thing, but
they're broad questions. It's fine.
We're just going to go with this. Why isn't Everson Griffin starting at this point?
It's weird, because normally I'd say it's probably a snap count consideration, but I think he is out snapping on him. Let me double check that real quick to make sure. But getting the start is like pretty significant, even if you don't end up with more snaps. I remember this way back when it was a discussion about like Fred Evans and LaTroy Guion, like way back when. And Fred Evans was out-snapping LaTroy Guion, but Guion was getting the starts, and Fred Evans was outperforming Guion. Guion ended up being long-term, like a slightly better, maybe a little bit more than slightly better NFL player. He ended up with a second contract, whatever. But at the time, Evans was outplaying him and out-snapping him, and it was very weird that Guion was considered the starter. Let me see. We got 105 snaps from Everson Griffin this year, and 185. So I'm completely wrong. Cool. Although we did only have the 3 games from Everson. So if we just take a look at the last 2 games, maybe that changes things. So Everson Griffin, last 2 games, we have 77 snaps. That was easy to add up. And last 2 games from Wanham. So he had the same number of snaps as Wanham in the Seattle game, but he actually had fewer snaps in this Cleveland game. 10 fewer snaps. It's probably 88. Yeah, it's 88 to 77. It might just be the reason that Everson Griffin seems so effective is because they have him on a snap count, but it is not a very limited snap count, right? Like, it's not like they're putting him in like the 15 key plays of the game, and you can kind of like conceivably believe that, like, okay, well, you know, the reason that, you know, he's got like this 20% pressure rate is because he only has to rush on like these obvious passing downs where he's, you know, not wearing down, and he's been able to kind of turn on the juice in a way where you don't have to conserve your energy like you would, you know, if you're playing the whole game. But, you know, he played like 40 snaps and they were all better. Like, Wanham is playing much more like my pessimistic pre-offseason takes on him than my during preseason takes on him, which is the key because I can always be right. I don't really know. It might be because the beginning of the game, they're more likely to be running downs, and Everson Griffin has like a really heavy bias. Like, he's playing 70-30 pass rush run defense. Whereas Wanham, I mean, he's also playing more pass rush than run defense, but you're just more likely to see him out there on a rundown than Everson Griffin. It's like 110 to 60. So it's not like an enormous difference, but I think it's just partially because they don't want Everson Griffin to be wasting a bunch of energy as a run defender. I don't think any of this is a good reason. These are just reasons I think might be the case. I think if Everson has a playing time incentive in his contract and a starting incentive in his contract, first of all, I don't think Mike Zimmer cares about that. So I don't think he's, you know, making decisions to like save like the team like $100,000 here or there. But it would be nice for Everson Griffin to be rewarded with that by getting the start, because he is playing better and he's still playing a lot of snaps. So the snap count thing doesn't seem to be, you know, a big part of it.
So what's going on at corner right now?
Yeah, it's really difficult to tell kind of what's going to happen with cornerback going forward. We saw, you know, we saw Dancer play for most of the game because Brinkley came out in the middle of the game. In the press box, it was announced that he was out with an illness, which I've never seen before. At least I don't remember seeing it. We could have a discussion about Lamar Jackson. That was listed, you know, when we talked about it.
Officially as cramps.
As cramps, right? The more I learn about it, the more I actually think that might be the case. But either way, it doesn't really matter, right? It could be gastrointestinal distress. It could be cramps. Don't know. But officially listed as cramps, so we're not going to count it. So I don't remember seeing a mid-game, you know, especially when illness doesn't show up in the injury report. A mid-game, he's out for illness. We asked after the game about Dalvin Cook, you know, how's he doing injury-wise? And Zimmer gave a fairly, for him, detailed answer. You know, Dalvin Cook, you know, he's been working on that ankle. We felt he was healthy enough to play. He played. He came up limping. So we took him out. We evaluated it. Looked like he was fine. We put him back in. He looked like the same guy. Not worried about it, right? So pretty detailed answer for Zimmer. We asked about Bashaud Breeland, and he's like, he's ill. It's just like the 2 words. He was ill. 3 words, right? It was just so terse, and it reminds me, the last time he was this terse about a defensive back was when we asked why Chris Boyd was taking snaps ahead of Cameron Dantzler, and he was just like, Boyd is playing better. And that was it. That's all we got. We didn't give us any more detail. And then Boyd took snaps ahead of him in training camp, then the preseason, and the first couple of games of the season, right? So, like, it very clearly signaled what he felt about the situation. And Dancer was, like, inactive, right? So now we get to this point where Dancer's playing a little bit. Boyd, I guess we didn't get to see much of. I guess Dancer earned his spot back ahead of Boyd, although this is like a special teams. We can only make so many people active decision sort of thing. I mean, like, he didn't, like, play all that well. Like, his PFF grade is really good. Some of that is run defense. And from a run defense perspective, he actually played, like, lights out. That's, worth mentioning. Coverage, his grade is a little bit higher here than I would have given him because he got burned a lot. We just talked about it at the beginning of the show. But Baker just kind of missed his targets when Dancer was in. So I don't really know that Dancer actually played all that well in coverage. One of the things that he has to get right is like his assignments and, zone handoffs and making sure that he understands kind of everybody's responsibilities on defense. Sounds like based on what Patrick Peterson has said that he's doing the right thing there. Peterson said he had a good game. I think some of that's just like being a good leader and hyping up the people on your team. So I don't know that I would read too much into it or anything like that, but I don't think that Dancer had a good enough game where you could say that demonstrates that he should play, right? I think it would be perfectly reasonable for Dancer to get the start next week. Like, I think it makes sense, right? I think it would make a somewhat reasonable amount of sense if Breland got the start next week. I would not be shocked if Chris Boyd got the start next week. There's a world of possibility at cornerback. All I know is that Patrick Peterson, barring injury, is going to be playing. That's it. That's all I know. So, anything can happen there. I guess probably not Perry Nickerson. That's the certainty we have there.
It's good that we have some form of certainty in whatever the hell is happening in the backfield.
Yeah, in these trying times.
In these trying times. Let me offer you an egg in these times. What else needs to be said about this particular game? This was a frustrating loss. This puts the Vikings in really rough shape as far as looking to accomplish anything in the postseason. It also puts us against a winless and just angry Lions team this coming weekend.
All kinds of knees will be bitten. A gnashing of knees.
This is this should be interesting coming up next weekend. But with two teams that want to lose so badly, I mean, a tie doesn't seem right. So I feel I feel like one of them has to want to lose more than the other, and by God, I just don't know which one's gonna be able to pull it off.
It's in the Lions' DNA. Like, I really believe in them in this circumstance, but I don't know, man. It's the Vikings.
Minnesota is finding new and amazing ways to lose every week. So, I guess the last thing I want to mention is that penalty that turned an extra point into a 2-point conversion. And how exactly it got to that point, because it looked like there were 12 men on the field and he was trying to call the timeout as a result of that. So people have demonized the player for calling timeout. Should they be demonizing someone else for, for being on the field when they weren't supposed to, or something like that?
Yeah, so the real issue is not the timeout. Like, we can say, hey, Sheldon Richardson, don't call a timeout when you don't have one, or whatever. But, like, they were boned either way, essentially, is what happened, because the penalty was going to be called with 12 men on the field. I guess you're much more likely to be found out for calling a timeout that you don't have, right? Like, that is, although we've seen that not get called, right? Like, we've seen 2 extra timeouts added beyond ones that people have had in games. But with the non-replacement refs, you are much more likely to be caught on the penalty of calling a timeout when you don't have one than the penalty of 12 men on the field. So I guess the right move here would not have been, but like they were probably going to incur a penalty either way, which is the reason they called the timeout. I don't know who the 12th person was supposed to be. That is kind of like a ridiculous mistake. You should absolutely know who should be out there on the field goal unit of all things. It's not like it's one of those like offsides, we haven't practiced this that much, or, it's a punt, but we expect a fake. So this is what we're going to do. It's just normal field goal. Like, you should just know who should be out there. Like the drill that it's not even like a drill really, but like they'll do this throughout the week where they'll essentially quiz the players who should be in. Like every team does this. They'll drill this in every week where especially on like the Saturday meeting right before the game, they'll say, you know, who's on field goal unit, and 11 hands go up. And then, you know, they say, you know, Christian Darrisaw, put your hand down. Now who's in on field goal unit. And then one person should raise their hand. And they'll go through scenarios. They'll say, this person's down. Now he's on field goal unit. This person's down. Now who's on it? And they'll do this. They'll do this with all 4 or 6 or whatever special teams units that you have. And so this should just not be an area of confusion. They'll drill this out. So kind of a ridiculous mistake. I guess some of that's on Ryan Ficken then, but I want to know kind of which player was the 12th player. It might have been Sheldon. I wasn't paying that much attention, but like the timeout was not the sole problem here. Also, it's like a 1-point swing, right? The Vikings can, in theory, should be able to make that. Like if you lose because of a 1-point game, which the Vikings have already done this year, then that's not the one thing that made you lose.
Yeah, just a weird set of circumstances, and it felt bigger at the time, and then it just sort of built up like further as the game went on. Like, really, you're not going to be able to score again, are you? No, that's what we're dealing with. Just annoying as hell. Let's talk about a couple of little bits of news here, specifically about Christian Darrisaw, Anthony Barr, and Cameron Dantzler. Some news has come out specifically on the last two, but Darrisaw, did he actually play this last game? Because there was discussion about it.
Snap. He got one snap as on the field goal unit, which is why I made that joke, as one of the offensive linemen protecting the kicker on the field goal unit. So he got the one snap. So he is healthy enough to play. No,
healthy enough for one snap.
Yeah.
Good core muscle.
This is right. This is not an indication that he's, going to be viable to take over Rashad Hill's job anytime soon. I suspect this is something where they don't know whether he's up to game speed. They don't even know if he's like conditioned appropriately yet. They don't know if he's got kind of the communication and chemistry necessary to play well on the offensive line. So I think Rashad Hill is graded worse by PFF than Oli Udoh, but I think Oli Udoh had a much worse game. Again, the piece goes into much more detail as to why, but one of the reasons is because Rashad Hill's mistakes were just like execution, this guy's better than me mistakes. That's not like that's not comforting. I'm not saying that's comforting, but what I'm saying is that's on the table for Christian Darrisaw, plus the Oli Udoh mistakes, which included stuff like, who am I supposed to block here? Should I be peeling off of this double team? Am I taking on the looper or the penetrator on the twist? Like the kind of awareness, chemistry, and communication mistakes that go with playing a new position or being a new player on the offensive line. Udoh made a number of those. That in theory is more fixable than, I'm just not good at football. But you're putting both on the table with Christian Darrisaw being out there instead of Rashad Hill. So that's part of the discussion about having Christian Darrisaw out there. He's had 1 week of practice. Other than that, he has not practiced the entire offseason aside from like 3 days of OTAs. So we have no idea his level of fitness, much less his level of like football specific fitness.
So is Anthony Barr going to play next week?
They anticipate it. The thing is, no one would be shocked if, he was on the inactives list again, but this one was a game time decision. Like last week, we kind of found out like the day before that he wouldn't be playing, or the night before. The week before, we found out like a day before that he wouldn't be playing. If the Vikings are not like messing with anyone, because they would have just put him on IR if they knew he was going to miss the 3 weeks. They genuinely thought, he's pretty close to playing. And so he's gotten closer every week. He's gotten closer and closer to a game time decision every week. He literally was a game time decision this time. So presuming that his health is on a trajectory, right, which is not always true, but presuming that he's just getting healthier, he should be playing this week.
And what about the news on Cameron Dantzler?
Yeah, so he got put on the COVID-19 reserve list. He disclosed that he was vaccinated, and the only way that you can be on the COVID-19 reserve list if you are vaccinated is to test positive for the virus that causes COVID-19. So all he has to do is test negative twice with 24 hours between the two tests. So very good likelihood, although it sounds like he's asymptomatic, but very good likelihood. We don't know for sure or anything like that, but very good likelihood that he will be available on Sunday. But that's just something to keep in mind.
All right, let's go to the mailbag and start off with Eric Thompson. He asks, for Arif's Thanos I Am Inevitable corner, will the Vikings finish the season with 7 wins, 8 wins, or 9 wins, and why doesn't it matter?
I think 9 wins because that one I think is the hardest to know what to feel about, and that in a 17-game season, and that I think is what is very Vikings-ish, right? Especially because the more wins you have, the more you kind of put yourself out of some of the interesting conversations in the draft. So it's going to be just enough to be like, man, if they picked like 3 spots earlier, they could have had this guy I like, a cornerback. I don't know. It feels like they're going to draft a cornerback, right? Like I don't know anything yet, but like they just lost a first rounder. So, yeah, 9 wins feels like the most frustrating outcome here. Yeah. I think 6 wins you can kind of feel better about.
Let's go to the username that's just labeled as Pain.
Yeah, okay.
He asks, is it normal to feel copious amounts of dread when your team gets the ball back late in a 1-score game? By the end, I was groaning whenever the Browns gave us more chances. Death by 1,000 paper cuts explains the Browns' offense yesterday and what the Vikings are doing to me. So I guess the question is it normal to feel copious amounts of dread when your team gets the ball back late in a 1-score game?
I mean, it hurts more when you know who's hurting you. Like, you know, if it's a close friend and they betray you, they betray your trust, maybe not trust, but like, you know, you've got a screw up friend and you ask them to do something and they don't do it. That's always more frustrating. That's always more annoying than if you ask a relative stranger, right? Like the Browns driving on the Vikings and scoring. Yeah, the defense is out there. The Vikings play a pretty big role in that happening, but it just doesn't feel the same as the Vikings having 2 game-winning drive opportunities at the end of the game and screwing them up. It's your wife stabbing you in the back, right? Like it's you know exactly who it is. It hurts that much more, even if you expect it, even if you know it's coming. It just hurts because you know them. It hurts because you care. And the people who care about you are the ones hurting you. Welcome to the Vikings.
Bishop Sycamore alumnus asks, what the hell has happened to Kendricks? Grade-wise, and the highlight of getting stiff-armed by Baker. And what was Baker's shuffle there as he went past?
Oh my God!
As he went past Kendricks,
I don't know. So sometimes players will high step and it's not showing. Like when Deion Sanders did it, he's usually showing off. But a lot of times you'll high step to like get out of tackles, or sometimes you can present like a weird angle that's like difficult. I don't think that's happening. I don't know. I don't think Baker knew what he was doing, right? Like, I don't think that he had an understanding of what he wanted to do. So,
it reminded me a bit of a kid who's like pretending to like run fast and like makes rocket noises or something. Like he's attempting to speed up. He's attempting to speed up that way. Like it looked a bit like that. Like he was trying to do like a yabba dabba do, like jump up into the air, his feet move, and you hear the little noise, and then he scoots off. Like it looked a bit like that.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it was just weird. I don't know, man.
So Kendricks, what's going on with him?
Yeah, so I don't know that I fully agree with the PFF grade here, but I don't think that he played particularly well. This is like another run game thing, right? So I think the difference between this game and last game, or the last 2 games, is that I guess he didn't really miss a tackle last week, or I guess Seattle, I should say. But, in weeks 1 and 2, he misses a number of tackles. That's annoying, but he's getting there. He's getting to the ball carrier. He's getting there at the 1 yard line or in the backfield or whatever. He's slowing that guy down. Even if he misses a tackle, you can gang tackle and do something about it. Here, he's kind of getting blown off the ball. He's not winning his blocks against guards. He's not winning his block against Andy Janovich here. There's moments where he's just not getting to the ball. So he doesn't miss tackles. And in fact, he still has a number of tackle opportunities, a number of tackle attempts. I want to say he had like 11 or so tackle attempts in this game. So, he misses a tackle here, right? But like, for the most part, he's not, and mind you, like 11 tackle attempts against Seattle is a lot because there were only 53 snaps, right? And only 50 of them was he like eligible to tackle someone because he was like rushing the passer on the other 3, right? So 50 snaps where you can tackle somebody. And if you have 11 tackle attempts or 11 tackle opportunities, really, that's a lot. In this game, they ran 78 plays. And only 4 of them was Kendricks rushing the passer. So 74 tackle opportunities and 11 is just a lot less. So he gets to the ball carrier less. They're running the ball more. So there's fewer tackles downfield on cornerbacks or on receivers and tight ends deep downfield for you to have those tackle opportunities. So there's just a lot more tackle opportunities like in the run game, right? He had 37 run defense snaps. That's 2.5 times the number of run defense snaps he had against Seattle. And he has about as many tackles, right? So he's getting kind of blown off the ball. He's not missing tackles. The tackles that he's making are impressive. He is allowing some additional yards after contact on some of these tackles. It just like wasn't that good. I don't know if it was as bad as PFF points out. But we didn't get like amazing plays and coverage or anything like that from him. We don't see like a pass breakup or anything. I think part of the reason is that PFF grades him poorly for the penalty. And that I sympathize with, right? Because they don't attempt to make a determination on whether or not a call was fair. They'll just say this player shouldn't have committed that penalty. And that's a uniform way to like kind of look at it. They impacted the team this way. If I'm looking at it, I'm saying I don't really think Kendricks did too badly there. And that was like a letter of the law kind of thing. Like, yeah, that's holding. But I think that's kind of one of those situations where you kind of, read the room or read the situation and probably don't call that one.
Let's go to Jack, who asks, after poor performances like this, and when they start to pile up, do players tend to place the blame on themselves underperforming or on coaches for game plans / preparation failures? In other words, is losing the locker room a real thing, or is that more of a fan-driven narrative?
Losing the locker room is absolutely a thing, for sure. But it's really context dependent. Some of it depends on just kind of the leadership and buy-in that a coach just has based off of their inherent qualities, their ability to relate to players, their charisma, their level to project authority, all of those things that are kind of soft skills that are really difficult to determine. And so like a bad coach that is making bad decisions that hurt the team might not lose the locker room. A good example of this is probably Leslie Frazier. So he had a really good relationship with players. He was not a very good head coach. Didn't really lose the locker room. And so it's not like if you play poorly, this is a risk. It depends a lot. Also might depend on the individual player. A lot of players will internalize and, either it gets them down or they use it as an opportunity to improve or whatever. But a lot of players will have a tendency to look inward, right? A lot of players will tend to externalize. Some of those players are good players. So it's not as if like this is, like a one is better than the other. Although I think typically speaking, you would rather, even if it's not a player's fault, a player thinks of it as their fault so they can find a way to improve to prevent it from happening in the future. But yeah, I mean, like Jalen Ramsey sometimes will externalize when it's not, but he's like an elite player, so like whatever, who cares? So like it kind of depends on the player, depends on the leaders in the locker room and kind of what their vision is. There have even been occasions of like winning teams that have turned on locker rooms, or turned on coaches. So like it's entirely dependent, and then it's also dependent as to why you're losing. Like if you're losing and the coach is making fairly standard decisions and the players are just bad, right? Or if your quarterback just isn't good. Like, I think maybe part of the reason Leslie Frazier didn't like lose the locker room, aside from his personality, it was pretty clear that like Christian Ponder is the problem, right? Like, no one is like, hey man, you should. I guess some players probably would have wanted Joe Webb, but like after the Joe Webb game, you're just like, yeah, I get it. But like, hey man, you should make Christian Ponder play better. Like, that's like not a reasonable ask. Like he's trying that already, right? Or like, yeah, put in Josh Freeman. You know, that I'd love to see what happens, right? Like, that's not what's happening. So sometimes, you know, if it's not clearly a coach's fault, but like if the coach is making like awful decisions, like if the coach is calling run plays on second and long and they aren't working, like for the Vikings, they seem to be working. Or if the coach is making baffling end of game decisions, or is asking them to play, like Lovie Smith, for example, asking them to play an outdated defense, right? Like they won 10 games the year Lovie Smith was fired. But I think, I'm not going to say I know for a fact that, you know, he lost the locker room. And in fact, a lot of those players will go to bat for him. So it might not even be the case. But like, it was very clear that Lovie Smith's commitment to the Tampa 2 without evolving. Like, I'll say this about Leslie Frazier. He's a Tampa 2 guy, but he evolved pretty significantly, and he's coordinating some good defenses that are not Tampa 2 based. Lovie Smith is still running the mid 2000s Tampa 2 in Houston, and he was running it in Illinois, and he was running it in Chicago. So like, it really just depends, right? Like, if it is more the coach's fault, then it is more likely. But if the coach has like a strong charisma or a strong relationship with the players, then it's less likely. So if it's a locker room full of players that are much more likely to externalize than internalize, right? Because externalizing, benefit of that is that you can gain a lot of confidence, right? Like, it's not my fault, I rule is a pretty good way to not beat yourself up when you give up a 40-yard touchdown or something like that. So like, it could be, you know, the players, it could be the leaders in the locker room. It really is just different. I think the way that we talk about it, we act as if it happens more often than it does. But players are much more likely to go to bat for their coaches than I think the way it's talked about. But it does happen for sure.
Kyle Slaby asks, which subset of Vikings fans would be most likely to chase Rick Spielman into a bathroom, demanding better O-line play? Kirk stans, run-the-ball purists, or analytics nerds?
I think Kirk stands, right? Because I think there's a good overlap between run the ball purists and people who think that running backs have an outsized is relative, but have an enormous influence on the effectiveness of the running game. I mean, those guys care a lot about the offensive line, don't get me wrong. But I think the Kirk stands would say, you know, because you cannot conceivably say that any other element of the supporting cast for Kirk Cousins, other than maybe the defense, right? But like, offensively, no other element of the supporting cast is like bad, right? Like Ben Ellefson, I hate saying this, Ben Ellefson is playing really good as a blocking tight end. Tyler Conklin is playing fantastically in all elements. Like, I know he got beat up by Myles Garrett, but he's actually a really good blocker right now, it seems like, and he's playing well as a receiver. Obviously, the Vikings have receivers. They have 3 receivers now, not just 2. Everything is going well except for this offensive line thing. And so I think in the mind of a Kirk Cousins stan, you fix that and you have like a really high level offense, like a really like top 5 potential, maybe not Mahomes, Jackson, whatever, but like a top 5 potential offense there. So I think it's probably the Kirk stans because it's kind of the last refuge of argument, right? Whereas run the ball, you just say, well, you got to run the ball more. Your offensive lineman will get better if you run the ball because they love running the ball, right? Like there's more wiggle room in play there. Like they also want better offensive linemen, but there's more wiggle room. And then the analytics nerds, like there's a lot. They want all kinds of stuff, right? They want everything, right? They're like, hey, stop drafting a running back. Yeah, drafting an offensive lineman is probably a plus move, but so is drafting another corner. Again, once more, do it. Like, you know, there's all kinds of things, right? So, draft a quarterback, man. Why aren't you drafting a quarterback? Draft a quarterback every year. Who cares? You know, like there's all kinds of things. So it's not specifically offensive line things for that group.
Let's go over to Beef Brewski, who asks, to my admittedly untrained eye, Nick Vigil looks good. However, his PFF grade is not. What am I missing? So I just want to point out that there's a number of different places online and even in broadcasts that have talked about how well Nick Vigil is doing. And I will say that as the person who probably hears your voice the most outside of like your significant other, I hear you being much more negative about Nick Vigil than anyone else. Can you justify your take?
Well, I guess PFF agrees with me, right? So, hey, I just want to throw in here. I've talked a lot about PFF grades on this episode. Some people have already asked questions that are specific to PFF grades. I just want to like throw this out there. They're not always right. I disagree with them all the time, but it's a good kind of starting off point, and we all have a much more accurate understanding of how players are playing as a result of it. But we have to be comfortable with saying that they're wrong here or there, right? So I'll put that out there. Next, yeah, I think PFF's like mostly right. I don't know. Nick Vigil had like one good game in coverage, maybe two, but like what are we seeing from like? So he had some splash plays in Cincinnati. I don't want to downgrade it too much. He actually had some really good splash plays, both in the run and in coverage against Cincinnati. He had like 6 tackles near the line of scrimmage or something like that, like a fair amount. He also missed a couple of tackles here or there. But the biggest issue is plays where he's not near the ball, he is like on the sideline. He's getting blocked to outer space. Like he's getting moved in the run game. And a linebacker making a play, especially one near the backfield, is a lot easier to remember than a linebacker creating an opportunity for someone else to make the play. Like one way that a linebacker can make a big play or create an opportunity for making a big play is if when they see the run coming, and I don't think Vigil is like incredible at diagnosis, so I don't know that he jumps a lot of these plays, but they see a run coming, they crash the box, and they attack the guard, and then they squeeze the guard into the lane. So the lane that the running back would run into disappears because now a teammate is filling that hole, and now they have to bounce out, or they have to make another decision that they wouldn't have made, or whatever. And that additional time allows, the defensive end or another linebacker or whatever to make a play. That's a good play from a linebacker that doesn't really show up in the stat sheet, but does show up very often in PFF grades. And also like in better run defense overall. And like, I don't think I've seen Nick Vigil squeeze a lane. Like I don't know that he has it in him. He doesn't have a lot of sideline to sideline movement, so he needs to be right, like off from the get go. He needs to just be correct. Otherwise he's not near the play. Yeah, I mean, but he hasn't had like a pass, like he's had an interception, right? And that was against Arizona. But he hasn't had like a pass breakup, right? So like we see a couple of plays in coverage. The beginning of the year, he had a couple of stops. I don't want to downgrade it too much. He had a number of stops near the line of scrimmage, but like, for the most part, he's kind of getting blown up. Like these guards are just manhandling him. So, that's why. It's because he's not near the ball enough. Like you remember the good moments he's near the ball. And I guess that's one of the good things about Nick Vigil is that once he's near the ball carrier, he's probably going to get a tackle. He's probably going to wrap that guy up, but or he's at least going to make contact. He's probably not going to get juked in the open field or anything like that. But he's not near the ball enough. Okay, so another way to think of it. I just talked about how Eric Kendrick's having 11 tackle opportunities in a game where there were 37 run defense snaps was relatively not that large. Vigil had like 7 or 6, I think. So,
yeah, still counts. Let's go to Dr. Aaron Matson real quick, who also increased his Patreon subscription. Just wanted to point out, thank you so much, Aaron. Let's go to his questions because he's got a couple of quick ones here, but still, there's some thinkers in here. The first question is, I've been watching a lot of old games on Game Pass lately. I'd prefer doing that to watching the ones that are playing on Sundays. That's led to 3 questions I'd like your take on. Number 1, with today's marijuana laws, would Percy Harvin's career have turned out differently?
Yeah, but not by much. And the reason for that is because NFL policy has not changed. It has changed. It has not changed that substantially in response. Now, obviously, the thing here is I don't think Percy Harvin ever got busted for smoking in the NFL, right? I don't think he ever got suspended.
He didn't. He just talked a lot about doing it afterwards.
Right. Yeah, and I think he would be much more likely to deal with a lot of, because he had a ton of pain issues, right? Like migraines is a huge one, but he had a ton of pain issues. Not surprising the way he played, right? Be much more likely to be comfortable using marijuana if marijuana were legal and if the NFL policy allowed it, right? So like, I'm not dismissing the question because I think there's these knock-on effects. And maybe, but I think the way NFL policy is written, it still does a fairly good job of discouraging players who are already discouraged, right, from, using it at critical moments that would have helped them, right? So that's part of it. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, is that I don't know that his marijuana usage would have changed that substantially, but also he had a lot of, and he admits this. This is something that he says, is that he doesn't think he was mature. He thinks that he had some mental health issues and stuff like that. And while I think that, again, having access to a wider range of medications and not being stigmatized from the thing that gives you peace probably helps a lot, I would say that that's still something that's kind of not resolved for him. So I would say that you're still probably going to get a blow up of some sort that gets him traded off the team. I think the odds of him having a more full career are certainly, I think they're on the table, and I think they're higher right today than they would have been. But I don't know that the odds are very high nevertheless.
It's not like the Josh Gordon situation where he continually tested and popped up on it. So, second question is, what's one draft bust from the last decade or so that you think, if they had been drafted by a better run or better coach team, could have had a good career to the Vikings?
Yeah, I added to the Vikings to this one because it's easier to think about it, right? Because I would have just been like, if Carson Wentz had been drafted to a team that would have developed him as a tight end, maybe we would have been able to see something from him. But I don't like, I was trying to think about the last decade of draft busts, and it's difficult for me to find a draft bust in the first 3 rounds, right? Like, I want to keep it there, because right now the answer is probably like Daniel Carlson, 5th round, right? But I wanted to take a look at Vikings draft bust drafted in the first 3 rounds, and it doesn't feel like any of those guys are guys that would have succeeded necessarily in a different environment. I think Jerick McKinnon could have carved out a really good career as a starting running back if he was a starting running back from the get-go. And butterfly effect, he probably gets less injured or fewer injuries, just generally speaking. So that was on my mind. Matt Khalil played at a high level kind of once, but I don't think that's a coaching environment thing. I think that was just kind of like a self-motivated kind of thing. I don't know that there was an environment for him that he would have been able to succeed at a high level at. So that crossed my mind. I was going through this list of Vikings draft picks over the last decade. Right? Because if it's not Vikings, you could just be like, Tavon Austin. I don't know. But Vikings draft picks over the last decade. And one I glossed over because I was sorting by approximate value, and his approximate value is actually really high, is Cordarrelle Patterson, right? Because he's a bust, right? He's the best kick returner of all time. Hard to call that guy a bust, but you didn't get a first round value out of him. I think that people who talk about Cordarrelle Patterson, and this is a very recency bias thing because he had 3 touchdowns for Atlanta just last week, but I think people who talk about him as a guy that would have succeeded in a different environment are overstating their case. I don't think he would have been not a bust, right? But I do think that he could have been much more productive. I remember when we were having these discussions back in 2013, 2014, why aren't the Vikings running Cordarrelle Patterson more often? Why aren't they, using him in the backfield more often? Why aren't they, using him on jet sweeps and stuff like that? And it's teams figured out when he was on the field that's what was going to happen. And so his negatives on those plays were just adding up. So I think that people overstate their case, and I don't think that there was a lot you could have done, but I think a better offensive coordinator or a better coaching environment could have extracted a lot more value out of him. What he is in Atlanta now is the result of a career trajectory that took many years to get to and many coaching staffs to get to. So even if he sustains this high level of play, maybe not 3 touchdowns a game or anything like that, but even if he sustains this high level of play, I don't know that that's evidence that was available to anybody that drafted him in the first 4 years of his career. But I think you could have gotten a lot more out of him. I don't know how, maybe better receiving coach, maybe a transition to running back, which I might have to actually eat crow on because I didn't really think that he should transition to running back. But whatever it is, he's an interesting offensive weapon that I think a more creative coaching staff would have been able to do more with, that would have been able to resolve this issue of all of those backfield runs suddenly getting stopped, because he's always running to the outside, and he just started taking -7 yard plays again and again. It was just not useful to keep trying it. But there are probably ways to work off of it where somebody who does a better job studying jet motion, orbit motion, rocket motion, or whatever, or the fly sweep, can build off of. So I think Patterson's the best example, but there's not a lot. Like I don't think Laquan Treadwell would have succeeded in a better like coaching environment. And it's not like a better coaching environment would have made Jeff Gladney a better person, right? So like it's tough to figure out kind of in these first 3 rounds who's a good candidate for that. Like if Andre Patterson can't get anything out of Scott Crichton, I don't think anyone can, right? So like I think Patterson maybe is the best option.
Thirdly, it seems like since at least 2009, the Vikings have leaned more toward need than drafting the best player available. I'm sure no team does purely one or the other, but what's one team that's emphasized BPA more than need, and how have their results differed from the Vikings?
So this is a really difficult one to really tackle because you need to be on the same wavelength about what a team needs as that team. And so you can't always know. Like if a team, has like a quarterback that threw for 5 yards in an attempt and they draft a quarterback, we're all on the same page. We know that you needed a quarterback, whatever. But like a lot of times, like when the Vikings drafted Sharif Floyd, they had Kevin Williams on the roster. He had already produced a really high level season the year before. He was about to produce in 2013 another high level season for the Vikings. And the only reason he wasn't on the roster in 2014 is because they had Sharif Floyd. So it wasn't technically a need, but also he was getting long in the tooth. That was near the end of his career. He didn't know how much longer he was going to be. So long term, he was a need. When they drafted Trey Waynes, it turned out not to be a short-term need. When they drafted Mike Hughes, it turned out not to be a short-term need. But the way the contract situation worked out, if Mike Hughes had been a good corner, the Vikings would have benefited tremendously from having him for like the 2020 season, right? So what we perceive as need and what they perceive as need, not necessarily the same thing because they might have a 3-year view of that question. Second, teams that are drafting later in the draft have the luxury to draft best player available much more often because they're much more likely to be deeper at a bunch of positions, not need the one piece, or if they do need the one piece to make a Super Bowl run, that player might not be available in the draft. And so they can double up at a position, right, that they're good at, right? So that's part of it, right? So you see the Steelers constantly drafting best player available for like a decade straight, right? And you're like, yeah, that's got to be the way to do it. And it's like, well, yeah, but like they don't have a need. Like they're fine everywhere. So they just draft whoever because they're equally a need, right? So that's difficult to determine. And then when a player who is drafted as the best player available turns out to be very good, they retroactively turned out to be a need, right? The way that we talk about it. Like when Daniil Hunter was drafted, he wasn't like really a need. Like he kind of was, right? Like Ryan Robinson wasn't an elite pass rusher, but he was very good. And Everson Griffin was your starter. And you could kind of rely on them for the next couple of years that if you didn't have a pass rusher a couple of years down the road, you could have drafted one in the first round, started drafting a developmental one in the third round. But that turned out to be a really good need-based positional draft pick that is now setting the Vikings to having, not a bottom 5 defense right now. So like it's really difficult. And teams that do draft BPA and those guys turn out to be busts, we don't actually remember that as much as we remember like, wow, the Packers didn't need a quarterback, but they drafted Aaron Rodgers to sit him for like 4 years. Like, and look at the dividends that's paid off, right? Or like Devontae Adams, he just wasn't good for 2 years. And finally, when they need him, when Jordy Nelson retires or whatever, he turns out to be good. And we don't remember we don't remember it. So I'm like having difficulty deciding. What did the Chiefs draft? Like Alan Bailey or Zach Allen? Or Zach Bailey? I don't know. It's Zach Allen Bailey. Those 3 words together form a name. And it was like a defensive end. It was like a 3-4 defensive end, I think. So it was really a defensive tackle. They didn't need one. And he busted and no one talked about it. Right. So, I don't know that there's a simple answer to this question just because, the quality of the team predefines our understanding of whether or not they're drafting for BPA or need. But I will say every team drafts for need much more than you think. So I'm going to end on that one.
Neil asks, if there was a Vikings version of the Netflix show Squid Game, would anyone actually win? I have watched every Vikings game so far this year, and I feel like they're already doing it. So,
For those who haven't heard, they've probably all heard of it, but Squid Games, this show on Netflix, is trending. It's like top 10 on Netflix right now. A bunch of people in the timeline are talking about it. I finally watched it, finished it last night. It's great. I strongly recommend it. I guess there's a dubbed version as well as a sub version. I hear the dubbed version is actually really good. I watched the sub version and I thought the acting was tremendous. I thought it avoided some of the tropes of the genre pretty well. It like investigated some interesting questions. And it has really great character writing. So I recommend it. It does get kind of gory. It's on within its genre, which is the death game genre. That's just a genre now. It is a lot less gory than its contemporaries. But like, it's there. If you get squeamish, you should know about it. It's really good. Anyway, who would win the Squid Game? The problem with the Squid Game, narratively, is that it makes a couple of choices. I don't want to spoil anything, but it makes a couple of choices that I think serve the thematic component of the storytelling that they want to do, right? The story that they want to tell. And so I don't know that the type of person that succeeds at the Squid Game in their universe is the type of person that would succeed in our universe. So I'll add that. And then I'll also say, God, there's so much I want to say about the Squid Game. I'll also say that the most likely person to win to get a combination of a bunch of different traits, but it's not just being fast or smart or strong. It's a bunch of other traits that seem to matter at different times. You need to build a connection with people. You need to be able to let people go. You need to be able to process, fast changing situations. So, like not Kirk Cousins. I think Patrick Peterson would do a great job. I think Danielle Hunter would do a pretty good job. I think those are my two candidates. I don't know that I put Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson in there. There could be like a sneaky pick, like, Garrett Bradbury might actually be quite good at that. But I'm going to go with Patrick Peterson is my favorite. I think Harrison Smith is up there. I think Danielle Hunter's up there. I could see Kendricks, but for whatever reason, I'm not vibing it. So I'm going to say Patrick Peterson.
I feel like Captain Ham is getting not getting his true respect here.
His heart's too big.
Oh, is that it? Okay. Well, I suppose that makes sense. Bethany Miller asks, for James's room building corner, what kind of labyrinth horror movie room have you trapped Arif in with all these corners? Is this symbolism like how Vikings fans are trapped even when we know it is hopeless but still come back week after week after week? It is a bit like an M.C. Escher painting, I suppose. M.C. Escher, like, drawing thing. Yeah, that's kind of how all this has worked over the years. Kevin asks, hi, Arif and James. Maybe this is a lame question, but could you do a segment on how you both became friends and fans of the team? I've been listening for a few years now and would love to know how you decided to commiserate like this. I
am not friends with James. Don't you dare spread that rumor.
Yeah, I barely know the man. I've barely known the man for over 30 years. Tell you what, Kevin, I'll actually do you one better. Our second Patreon bonus episode was on the origin of the show and on some inside joke stuff. And it was published in, I think, March of last year. So anything after March, including like stuff like the bingo rant and all that, that's not on there. But I ended up just putting that up on the Norse Code YouTube channel. So I go ahead, it's live now, so you can go and take a listen to it. We've had this question a number of times, so I'm just putting it up there. If you're interested in hearing how the show kind of came together, we have covered it before and likely will rant a bit about it in about 10 episodes since we're going to be having episode 400 here in a couple of weeks. But it's a weird base 10 number to be celebrating, but here we are. So yeah, go check that out. We've had this requested a number of times, so go ahead and check it out. It'll be in both the show notes and in the actual description of the podcast itself on all of the podcast aggregators and stuff. So check it out. It's over on the Norse Code YouTube channel. Is this where I get to say like and subscribe? Because I really don't like saying like and subscribe. So
like and subscribe.
Yeah, thank you, Arif. I'm glad you decided to just lower yourself for that. Also, Kevin asks, and on a more pessimistic note, because optimism is not allowed here, do you see Zimmer or Spielman getting canned this year? Since so many people are mentioning this, we'd like to know what you guys think.
Yeah, I don't see a mid-season fire. I'm not saying like it's not going to happen, but I think more likely than not, it's not going to happen. Two reasons. One, I do think they're going to win some of these games coming up. Two, I don't like what's the benefit to a mid-season fire? Like you don't get a new coach any faster. You're going to find a different guy who's not your interim 9 times out of 10. And if you do get the interim, that doesn't often work out. So like, yeah. I don't see a midseason fire. End of season firing, I think, is certainly on the cards. I think if they don't make the playoffs and it's circumstances like these where it's not like Kirk Cousins got injured or is out because of COVID or whatever. If it's all circumstances well within the team's control, right? Losing close games and just not executing when you need to execute. Yeah, I could totally see it. So I'll say right now, yeah, I don't know that they're playoff bound. I think they're not likely to make the playoffs. So I would say, yeah.
Just looking at the way that kind of the team is operating and with the losses, I'm trying to compare this to, was it last year that the Falcons fired their coach? I think it was last year that the Falcons fired their coach. And it felt like the teams, like the Falcons team was going in a completely different situation, like off the rails sort of thing. Whereas the Vikings so far this year have just been losing really close games and have successfully beaten themselves on a number of occasions. So it really does feel different compared to a team that fires their coach midseason, as opposed to the Vikings now, which is just, they just can't seem to finish, or they just can't stop beating themselves up. Let's go to Damian Barrett, who asks, question for Arif Sportsbook Corner. What is the current over-under on the length of Don's marriage? Prior to Jacket Gate, I would have been hammering the over, but in retrospect, all the lovey pics, and posts have a methinks the lady doth protest too much feel, and 6 months seems about right.
Interesting that you'd hammer the over without knowing what the over-under is. Dusty, who is alive, is not feeling that. You got to know the over-under. I think didn't we put an over-under on this like a bit ago?
I don't recall. I've spent too much of my life talking about Don's marriage.
Yeah. I mean,
fair.
At this point, we all have.
Yeah.
6 months. I think that's a fine over-under. I think right now, it really depends on whether or not he's taken our advice. Because if he has, under. Otherwise, there's a good opportunity for the over there. God, the jacket thing really screws things. Like, live betting, you start smashing the under, the line changes, you no longer get, minus 110 odds on the under. And so now you're thinking like, oh man, am I going to chase, or am I going to like see if I can just make it up on these long odds, like, plus 500 to hit the over. So like, that's tough. But I think heading into Hawaii, I think the over-under was probably a year, I think. And then I think coming out of Jacket Gate, knowing how deep-seated these issues are, knowing that the jacket is going to come up for the rest of the relationship, I think we gotta put it at 6 to 8 months, somewhere around there is the over-under.
Just ridiculous. Let's go to Don from Ohio, who is the subject of the last message. Don from Ohio asks, now that I'm rooting for the Browns for the rest of the year, the wife is a huge Browns fan, which Browns player is going to break her heart in the playoffs, and why is it Baker?
100% it's Baker. I don't know that there's a lot of other players that can break your heart. Like, there's a lot of other players that can ruin it, right? Like Chase McLaughlin missing a kick. That like ruins it, right? But to break your heart, they first have to have your heart. And, Baker, perfect, right? And for a position that like affirmatively produces, like that's a good one. Like it's difficult for you to be like, yeah, man, I love Joel Bitonio. I love Wyatt Teller. I love Alex Mack, the best interior line best interior offensive line in the NFL. And like they could break your heart by like allowing a bunch of pressure, but it just doesn't feel the same as like Baker just like throwing a pick six to seal it, right? Myles Garrett not getting a sack, that's like waiting for an event to occur, like a low frequency, high impact event like a sack. That one's tough. I think it could be Odell, right? I think Jarvis Landry has more of the Browns fan base than Odell. So, but without Landry, it's tough. I think if Odell had been producing and healthy, it could have been him. But I think it's got to be Baker, because just a sweet pick six is enough to really crack open a heart.
And finally, for Arif's gift-giving corner, the wife and I are in the process of delivering Hawaiian gifts to friends and family, and we are hesitant to send James a gift. He didn't seem to appreciate the last gift I sent him. What do you suggest I do?
I think in any relationship where you've noticed a behavior that is bothering the other person, the best thing that you can do is to keep at it until they learn to love it. That is the key to a healthy relationship. I can't see that going wrong. Certainly that's just how that is. When they say relationships are built on communication, that's what they mean. Communicate that you're going to keep doing that thing, and the relationship is, I think, going to be on solid footing.
I feel like I just had a brain cell up and die in my head. Like I like that might be. And this is coming from me, the worst relationship advice I have ever heard.
I don't see what's wrong. We keep on hearing that relationships shouldn't be about changing people. You should love people for who they are. And what is more you than the thing you know is going to bother someone else and you keep doing it? That is quintessentially who you are as a person. But that was a little bit too convincing. I don't like that. That was a little too close.
At what point does this turn into like Arif's Tony Robbins corner?
Yeah, I don't do any I send James a gift. But other than that,
this. I don't even know what to say. I am equal parts disturbed and disappointed, and mostly in Arif here.
What? You're not disappointed in Don?
No, I just assume that Don's going to send it anyway, and it's going to be some Hawaiian bingo card. And
that would rule. A Hawaiian-themed bingo card? What a dumb gift. I love it.
I feel like Don's actually going to send either that or a cursed tiki item that he found on a beach, and then it's just going to be providing me with more...
Marcia, no!
Exactly. It's going to be all sorts of fun for me. All right, that's going to be the end of this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So I mentioned the offensive line piece over The Athletic. That's going to be there soon. Other than that, not much. I'm going to be doing a mailbag at The Athletic, probably publishing Thursday, so get your questions in by Wednesday evening so that I can furiously answer it Wednesday night as if I was doing work beforehand. Not much else. Just those things. Follow me on Twitter, I guess. I don't know.
You didn't even provide the full URL for The Athletic.
No, figure it out. It's on you guys now.
At this point, it's been said enough times. If you can't recite it in your sleep, you're just not listening to enough Norse code.
Yeah, and frankly, I'm disappointed in you.
And you can make up for that by going to norsecode.threadless.com and picking up the new Christmas apparel, including the fabulous Christmas socks. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back later this week to preview the Lions game. So please remember, case cookus. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.